Erev Tov, everyone. Tonight's Rosh Chodesh Av, and it begins the period of time of the morning of the 9 days, which lead us to Tisha B'Av. This year, Tisha B'Av is a nidche. Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbat, and is therefore pushed off to Sunday, the fast, and the observance as well. The institution of the 9 days of mourning is one that evolved over time. We find in Tanakh that after the Churban Bayis Rishon and the fact that the Jews were in exile in Bavel, then they returned to Eretz Israel under the permission of Koresh, the king of Persia. And they were led by 3 Nevi'im, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who were the last 3 prophets that the Jewish people possessed, because in the Bayis Sheni, prophecy itself was no longer present. So we read in the Novi that the Jewish people came to them at the beginning of the Second Commonwealth, and they asked the question, Evke b'tzoma chamishi, shall I yet mourn, commemorate the Churban Beis HaMikdash? Now we're home, we're back again, we're beginning to build the second Beis HaMikdash. We still have to commemorate Tisha B'Av. And the Navi, so to speak, refers the question to heaven, because there are many facets to this. It's still fresh in their minds because it's 70 years, really less than 70 years since the temple was destroyed, when they first get permission to go back. And there are people alive who still remember the first Beit HaMikdash. And undoubtedly, the Churban Beit HaMikdash was an enormously traumatic and bitter event. So they felt, how can we let it pass without anything? How can we not commemorate it? We know in the long run of Jewish history that we commemorate not only good things, but things that could be better. So they asked the question, Evke, shall I weep? Shall I mourn? Shall I commemorate Tisha B'Av? Now that we have a restored Commonwealth and that we've begun the construction of the second Beis HaMikdash? Or no? We should rather rejoice and redouble our efforts to build this one without resorting to mourning what happened to the first Beis HaMikdash. And the interesting thing that the Navi tells them is that he has a vision from heaven, and heaven tells him there's no reason to commemorate the Churban Beis Hamikdash. If now that there's Shiva Sion, and that the second Beis Hamikdash will be built, so then there's no time to mourn anymore. So during the entire period of time of the Second Temple, 420 years, there was no Tisha B'Av. And there certainly was no week like the 9 days. The second Beis Hamikdash is destroyed also. And it's destroyed in the same month. First Beis Hamikdash was mainly destroyed on the 9th. Second Beis Hamikdash was mainly destroyed on the 10th, but it began on the 9th. So they lumped it all together. And they instituted the 9th day of Tishrei, Av, as being the day of commemoration and of mourning. The Gemara gives an opinion that one of the great rabbis said, if I would have been consulted regarding the matter at that time, I would have instituted on the 10th and not on the 9th. The Gemara answers that it began on the 9th. Well, what did he mean? I would have instituted it on the 10th. So there are many interpretations, and one interpretation which has validity is he says the first morning was canceled by the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. The destruction of the first temple was canceled, so to speak. That commemoration was no longer present. So in effect, we are commemorating the destruction of the second temple. The destruction of the second temple is concentrated on the 10th, when the Romans burned the fireproof building that Herod had built. And that's why the Gemara says, "Ishlich et chamato ala eitzim ala avodim." God destroyed the temple, but he did not destroy the people. Herod had built the building that he thought was indestructible. And the truth of the matter is, it was built out of stone and marble, and with nothing flammable there, except for the parochas inside. But the Ravon Shalom, the wrath of heaven was directed against the building, so it was destroyed. So now we are in the year 70 of the Common Era. No more Beit HaMikdash, not only that, but the Jewish people now are forced to leave the land of Israel. Not all of them, but the great many of them. Tens of thousands are sold into Roman slavery. Others scattered throughout the Mediterranean area. So now there's a period of mourning. So the period of mourning should be the day the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. And we have decided that we're going to do it on the 9th to commemorate both of the destructions. However, we have beginning of this week's parsha, the Torah tells us that Aaron HaKohen, tonight is his yortzeit. Aaron HaKohen passed away on the first day of Av. Chodesh HaChamishi ve'echad LaChodesh. It's the only date of a yard site that is mentioned in the Chumash. We have no dates for the passing of our fathers or our mothers or Moshe Rabbeinu. For Moshe Rabbeinu, we have a tradition that it's the 7th day of Adar, but it's not written in the Chumash. I mean, here it's written the day that Aaron died. And Chazal, later, the Kli Yakar quotes this many times, that Misas Tzadikim, when a righteous person, a tzaddik like Aaron HaKohen, that the entire Jewish people relied on his presence, and that he was a profound influence on the whole society, that when he passed on, so that is like the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So because of that, already within a few years after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jewish people began a period of mourning, beginning with Rosh Chodesh Av, because the death of Aaron is like the burning of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's like the Beis Hamikdash was from the 1st to the 9th, there's a process of destruction. Now, this was not a universal custom, nor was it the halakha. If you, the Gemara in Tainus that discusses this, Avelus Yeshona Shehi Avelus Tishba, the Gemara says that the observance was of mourning was restricted to Shvua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av, to the week in which Tisha B'Av fell. So there would be a question this year that there is no week in which Tisha B'Av falls, because our observance is when? Sunday. And therefore there is no preceding week. So that the Avelus would only be on the day of Tisha B'Av itself. Others say that because this year is a Nidche, and Tisha B'Av is really on Shabbat, so we can say that all of next week is Shvua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av. There are differences of opinion and difference of customs. In the Sephardic world, generally, they did not have the 9 days. They observed only Shvua Shechal Bo Tisha B'Av. In a year such as ours, they did not have any period of mourning at all. However, in the Ashkenazic world, already in the time of the Gaonim, the split between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim doesn't exist between Spain and France, even though that's when it was, so to speak, solidified. But it begins in the time of the Gaonim in Bavel, where there were different yeshivas. There were Surah and Nardoa and Pumbedita. Those were the 3 main yeshivas. And then there were other smaller yeshivas. And the different areas of Bavel. So Bavel then included Syria, what today we call Syria. And it included what we call today Lebanon. And it included today what we call Iraq. And also parts of southern Turkey. And that was very heavily settled by Jews. And there were differences of custom and modes of prayer that existed in these different areas. Many Mefarshim say it was the difference between those that went in exile from Yerushalayim, so they had a greater degree of mourning, than those that, let us say, lived in different cities, were not close to the temple, and therefore they had a lesser degree. They only had Tisha B'Av itself and not the 9 days. But the Ashkenazim have the 9 days, the entire week, and we have restrictions. Restrictions of what we eat. We don't eat meat, we don't drink wine, we don't bathe or shower, though in our time, there are many Rabbonim that are makil because of the heat of the climate. Even though the heat of the climate was pleasant in Bavel, perhaps greater than it is here. But there were those that were makil that some sort of showering, bathing could take place. Then when the Balei Kabbalah came and they used the mikveh daily, etc. So then the shaila arose, can you bathe in the mikveh? And is that considered bathing, or whether that's considered tahara, etc.? All of these things evolved. And there's a whole Shulchan Aruch therefore on the 9 days. And not to wear new clothing and not to wear fresh clothing. So we put on a few shirts before the 9 days so that we would have a shirt for the 9 days. And there's different halachas for Shabbos Chazon itself, which this year is Tisha B'Av. So all of that became a part of it. And one theory that I would mention in conclusion is that as we see with the kinnis, there have been so many tzoros that have befallen the Jewish people over the ages, that if we commemorated each one separately, we'd be in mourning every 365 days a year. The Shoah is a good example. There's 30,000 people a day died in Auschwitz for 3 years. So in order to make life bearable, we've concentrated the period of mourning. And we've concentrated it on Tisha B'Av and on the 9 days. But behind it is not just only the Churban, but all of the difficult and tragic things that have occurred to the Jewish people in our long exile. It's interesting that when the state of Israel was declared, there was a serious discussion amongst the Rabbonim whether or not the periods of mourning could be modified. And because of the fact that the Shoah was still so close to us, still so close, and the fact that we were always at war here, so they've left it alone. And therefore, we still have this period of mourning. And the shul, which is Ashkenazic, naturally follows the rulings of the Ramah, and we commemorate the 9 days of mourning. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashio, Merot Sakarish Baruch Hu, Zakas is Israel. Aficha Chir B'Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar, Adonai Chavei Tzaman Tzidko Yagdil Torah Yadir.